Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Drew Thornton, front of house engineer for Billie Eilish. Drew's been working with Billie since 2018, from club shows through to international arena tours, festival headlines, and everything else you can imagine. I'm such a massive fan of his mix and the way that the entire Billie show has been put together, so I'm really excited to get into it. So many questions. Dude, let's go. When did you start working with Billie? Was it 2018?
It was actually 2017.
17.
The funny thing is, I have a tendency to be linked to drummers. It's funny. Andrew and I just got off the Verite tour, and we did I think he did 3 runs with her. I did 2.
Yeah.
And we were looking to change things up, and we got coffee at the beginning of 2017. I think it was it 2017. And he was telling me, he's like, yeah, this artist that I'm starting up with, she's like on fire. And, as a young engineer, and I work for myself, I contract myself to artists directly. So social media is kind of like a gauge of like how to figure out, what this artist is doing. And I remember looking at what she was doing on social media didn't match to what she was doing size-wise for venues. Like, she was just off the map.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, I was like, this is such a unique person. Like, amazing music, very simple and forward and all about the song. But also, I remember being like, wow, she's too cool. Like, she didn't at all smile in the beginning. It was like that was like all her promo shots was very like, I don't know, like she was always like straight faced. And it was fascinating to me. And it was just like, she already encapsulated, she had this vision of what she wanted to portray, how her music should sound, how her show should look. I'm from like when she was 15 when I started. So it was an incredible experience. And I came on, I think the tour after the first tour, I think that Andrew was doing.
Right. What a ride.
It has been one heck of a ride, that's for sure.
I mean, the only break you had was probably 2020 to 21, right?
I mean, the funny thing is, most of 2020, yeah, we were off. And I feel like because of who Billie is, and because of how technology advances, I feel like we spent a lot of time working. I mean, I do feel like it might have been roughly 3 or 4 months, but that was huge. I mean, there's not a whole lot of people in our industry that was working that much. I mean, it's nothing compared to a normal work year, but it was definitely a lot, for us. And it was great. I mean, we're just now at this point coming to a point where we actually are slowing down, which is wild to think that almost 5 years in, we never really I don't even feel like, we did spend a lot of time off the road because of the pandemic, but I mean, we did work some. So this is the first time where I'm like coming up from air. I'm like, oh, well, if she's not touring, what am I going to be doing?
But wait, aren't you going straight into Phineas though as well?
Well, yeah, we got off a tour with Phineas, which is great. I mean, I feel like the thing about them is that they work so closely together, and usually exclusively just the two of them doing the record. So if they're in record mode, I don't imagine that Finn will be touring much.
Right.
But I've been wrong before, so it's hard to tell. We'll just see how the rest of the year shakes out. I mean, we thought we were going to be done in April, and now it's already September. So I'm sure.
Wild. It'll just keep going. I'm sure it'll just keep going. Yeah. She's just that good. So
amazing.
I've got honestly so many questions. It's a case of where do I start? So when you started out with Billie, what were you using, like console wise? What did you start out with? What was your how many inputs were you having to deal with? Tell me about how that was.
I mean, it was a pretty interestingly unique scenario. So they started carrying these little Allen and Heath D-Live consoles.
Oh, cool.
At that time, they only had the C1500, and the engineer before me was using it. And then I feel like I had just done a series of festivals where I was teching, and I've mixed on every single console. And to me, you're always kind of running a list of pros and cons about each desk. Because to me, I feel like most of your show should come from the desk, minus a little little sprinkles of amazingness. You know what I mean? Like it should be mainly from your desk. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like 70% of your show should come from your desk. And it's hard. It's like when you're kind of like, because I was always dreaming about that. I was like, well, if I could carry my own console, what console? So I would always had this mental thing, and I feel like this desk was the first desk that really kind of checked a lot of those boxes. And I mean, I still to this day have an incredible relationship and support from Alan and Heath. And that's one of the things that we ended up doing as the first thing out the gate. I brought on a C1500. We had a couple little active stage boxes that are 16 inputs and 8 outputs, and we sprinkled them across the stage. And we were doing so many festivals. One of the driving forces was that, she's a quiet singer, and it was, it's a challenging show. I even think about the SPL that I was trying to get back then was 3 dB lower than what I'm getting now with her in front of the PA, which is a pretty good advancement, but it's been a very tedious experiment in my mind of trying to think about how to maximize every little square inch of real estate that I have in that vocal mic. But, the managers were into it because they had so many promos, like as a new artist. I mean, as you probably saw with Ellie, like it doesn't stop. You got 5 o'clock in the morning, you have to go and do some weird acoustic thing and some interview for a radio station.
I've been there, yeah.
Yeah, it's just awful, and you never sleep. And you seldom want to do sound check at that point. You just want to be a well-oiled machine. And I think that having our own kit, flying with our own, sub boxes and our consoles, and just knocking it out and just constantly moving, all of it was flyable. I mean, I think at that time we were probably 20 to 30 Pelicans.
Right.
So it's obviously got a lot bigger.
There's still quite a check-in, though, isn't it? Having 30 Pellies at check-in. There's still quite a few.
Yeah, it's a lot, back then, and I feel like the audio came to, I want to say like 7 or 9, which wasn't too bad.
No.
I mean, it's still a lot, but and also like my back, I have permanent marks for for that kind of behavior. So like now I have to be diligent about it. I can't keep doing that stuff. So
yeah, right. So with the D Live, did you jump straight into like waves? Were you running plugins from the off?
No, off the first step, I focused mainly on the desk. And then when I kind of got through, I kind of realized how quiet she was. Our first show was a festival, Throw and Go, and I had never done anything with them. And then our second show was it was a headlining show at the House of Blues in Chicago, which is not necnecessarily my favorite place. Just
it's a cool room, though. I like it there.
It is. It's beautiful, but the PA is really on stage. So for a front of house engineer with a quiet singer, you're just like, oh man, like she can literally reach out and touch it, So, eventually I integrated waves because back then even, the desk now has certain expanders and stuff geared for that because of my close relationship to, Alan and Heath. I was just like, you guys should put this in the desk. And they were like, okay. I'm like, all right.
Well, that's handy, isn't it? That's good.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you get to a point where the manufacturers are really taking your, consideration, about what your needs are. So Waves was but I remember that tour that you saw, I had already integrated Waves at that point. So,
right.
And it's a pretty handy thing for what it is. And it's still part of my life today.
Is it? I was going to ask you that, yeah, because I was reading an interview of yours. I just read interviews of engineers. I was kind of looking at the vocal chain, and it was the primary source enhancer. Do you still use that?
I do.
You do.
Yeah. It's always changing in my mind, right? So I already have the plans for the next rendition. I already have an idea. I was like, okay, well, I think I have. It's always you're kind of like trying to find. I think I got a little more real estate that I could pull out, or I got a way that if I change this, signal chain, change it up, I could actually get it to run more efficiently.
Yeah.
So there's a couple things that I kind of started doing that work, and then there's also I have had my fair share of things that didn't work.
What didn't work? What kind of things did you try that didn't quite work?
Well, it did work and it didn't work. For me, I think one of the things that kind of I was really kind of leaning on was at that time, I was using graphic EQs on the channel to kind of, really cut out certain frequencies. And then I also had this plugin I was using, X Feedback, which by Waves. So I was able to
ask you about that actually.
Yeah. So in the earlier days when we had no time, I would pick 3 points on the stage, and then I would ring out the mic in 3 points. So like in the downstage center position, stage right and stage left. And, it worked well. And I feel like in defense of the plugin, it didn't pull out a lot of power or volume, but it did sometimes have ability to sync a lot more than it needed to.
Right.
The automated process made it faster. So if I was cut for time, which sometimes I was, it was an advantage. But in this point where, I have a little bit more time, and I won't say I have a lot of time, but I have a little bit more time to do a different approach. My approach right now is EQ only where and when she is. So like, to me, I set up, like, I don't do a whole lot of corrective EQ. Luckily, at this point, I feel like on stage that I feel like I've gotten the chain as tight as can be. But I set up zonal EQs. So like the design of our show, there's that, remember that diamond, there's the tip of the diamond. She spent 60 to 70% of the show. And that tip of the diamond in relation to the PA, she was in front of it, which is never great. And when you're spending that much time at that point, it's a very particular kind of feedback. It's like a little bit of the, from like 3 to 6 range. Yeah. So I would be like, okay, so this is zone 1, right? And then when she goes out on the thrust, in addition to zone 1, I can add zone 2 when she's on the thrust. Right.
Oh, cool.
So that way, wherever she is, I'm watching her and pulling EQs out based on where she is. And it's funny when you're kind of really pushing it, like even keys of the song can be problematic.
Yeah.
Right. Even transient drums can cause feedback in your vocal while she's out in front, which is another one of the approaches that, to me, I realized that this gig was going to be more about the overall mix and my approach to all the inputs, not just the vocal.
Yeah.
I was like, how do you get drums to sound loud and big without them being loud and big? You know what I mean? Like, how do you fake that? How do you make sure that those transients don't drive you mad? You're like, when a snare drum is causing feedback in your vocal mic, it's a sad day. I mean, as a drummer, you never want to be like, oh, well, I just got to turn down the snare drum. You're like,
no, but I've been there as a drummer actually with Ellie. Incredible voice, but not a massive amount of gain. A good amount, but it would obviously problematic on the thrust. But we went through a process of trying every drum screen that'd been manufactured, and I went to lighter sticks, and I changed my cymbals from to bigger and darker and thinner actually, so that the transient was there, but the wash was sitting below Joe's EQ that he was playing with an vocal, which blew my mind when he kind of explained to me the concept. So I noticed the different evolution, like the evolution of Andrew's drum screens, how the big full perspex glass he's got now, how does that affect the vocal mic really? Like, be honest, not like.
So I'll be in defense, right? So as an engineer, I won't lie. It's not a picnic for me to make drums sound good behind a shield either.
Yeah, for sure.
Like
I've got you on record saying that.
It's not a choice that I want to make. It's a choice I have to make.
Yeah.
And I hate it too because I know that Andrew, he's a champ. I know that he has visual problems too behind that shield. Like the glare from lights can cause a reflection through the glass that he cannot see, which is a problem. You can't, when you can't see what's going on, how are you supposed to react? But he's always fantastic. And, I try as much as possible not to interfere with the way he's playing. And I tell you what, man, he is one hell of an arena drummer. I mean, you saw
100%.
And I haven't had to tell him to change anything about what he's doing. I won't lie. There is some artifacts that happen when she gets close to the glass, when she gets close to the drums. But one of the things too, it's like he understands where I'm coming from, because I have to be very diligent, because that vocal mic can destroy the drums. And if people don't understand what I mean by that, it's the bleed from the vocal mic and the drums bleeding into the vocal mic and destroying the attack of the drums, make it sound thwacky, or like it's not great. And it's weird because it's like a temporary thing. And granted, maybe no one notices, but to me, it's something I was very, very like, I was like, oh man, okay. So I have to think about not having pokey drums, and I have to also think 3-dimensional. Like I have to focus on the space around the drums, not just the transients, not just the things that are in the middle of the mix, because she's in the middle mix and so are the kick and the snare. So I'm like, how do I make these things sound big? And that's been, I truly think that this gig has made me way better of an engineer. I mean, it's not just because the gig had the challenges, but I feel like also too, to give credit to myself, it's the ability to like literally microscopically break down what you're trying to do and try to make it better, and I tell you what, I'll always be grateful for that, because it's been a fun ride, and it really does. It changes everything. Cause at that point you're like, wow, this mentality that I have about the other inputs also translates very well to broadcast. It translates because, you can't have spiky transients of these drums just barreling down into your master bus or into any other groups where it could mess with. So, it was definitely a fast learning pace and trying to keep up and just try to keep the show getting better, every time.
So on the, oh man, so many questions. I've got a question about broadcast mix. But first of all, before drums. Drums. So the drum, even in that 90-minute show, the drums, the palette of the drums changes so wildly from minimalistic tops to like raucous rock drums at moments. And like how are you processing the acoustic drums, and how would you approach that balance between like electronic, the triggers, the pads and triggers, and the acoustic kit?
Oh, I love that question. You know why? Because it is not easy to make an acoustic kick drum sound as big as an 808. And that was the first thing. To me, I was just like, I hate that. I hate going to a show and these guys have these massive 808s playing on a sample pad, and then you hear the kick drum and it comes in and you're like,
yeah, right.
It's like, it's sad. And like, to me, if I was the drummer, I wouldn't like that. I want to like, and because low end is such a part of that show, there are so many things going on. To me, I was just like, I first of all have to make sure that the kick drum is as big as those 808s, as big as it is. And then secondly, trying to make sure that the electronics not only feel natural, you know what I mean? Like, you don't want something super bright and then your drums aren't super bright, so you can't, but like trying to figure out how to blend them together, in a way that makes sense, which is also hard because then you have that transient issue. So like, I'm also trying to figure out how to not make the drums so pokey, because the pokiness is what was causing a lot of issues when she's out on the thrust. And I feel like a lot of the approach for the drums, I tend to like, and I mean, who knows, I'll probably change it. You never know, but I'm a huge fan of running distortion on my parallel bus at all times and feeding that parallel bus for just the shells and, focusing on trying to get, and that was one of the things too. I was like gridding up the low mids and the high mids in a really cool way and tucking that under. So that way the distortion plays a trick on the mind, because distortion makes the ear focus without, any kind of effort.
Yeah.
Like, mix engineers use that as a tool to just get something. I was like, okay, well, I can't hear it. Well, if you added a little bit of distortion, for some reason, your ear can find it. Just the way that distortion in our ears work.
It's an amazing trick on bass.
Fantastic. It's a great trick on bass. So that's kind of interesting. What was the other part? Did I cover all the electronics and
electronics and acoustics? Oh, do you have what's your signal path on the drums? Do you have any hardware things in the rack? Are you running distresses on snares or kicks or anything?
Well, so, and maybe this isn't the correct thing, but I feel like because of the way that they make these records, I I have to say that I just was like, I'm not going to use any outboard gear. And also, I kind of feel like a lot of younger engineers, they run to the outboard gear really quickly. And one of the plus sides to my career arc is I started in the studio. I did a record for free outside of a 60 to 80 hour work week, you know.
Yeah,
what I mean?
wow.
And I got to play with every piece of gear out there. That's a beautiful, like 4,000 to 9,000, you know, J, and then like getting to play with 1083 or 1081s and 73s, vintage 47 FET microphones, like using these old ribbon mics. It's like all these kinds of things, playing with these acoustically mastered rooms, you know, in New York. The biggest, like it was Legacy Recording, which was Right Track and Sound on Sound. Yeah. So I didn't even know what I was doing. And I mixed it all on the desk using the automation. And I remember I listened to that mix, and I'm usually pretty hard on myself, but that I still to this day, I'm like, it's not bad for someone who didn't even really know what he was doing.
The tools were good.
Yes. And there's forgiveness in those tools. I mean, of course it sounds better, you know, and I just told this to Toby Francis when we were talking about something that he's got cooking up. You know, he was just like, well, what's your opinion on analog to digital, going to the guy that is literally all analog right now on the Chili Peppers tour?
Yeah, right.
And I was just like, well, you know, obviously analog is better, but also digital is convenient and consistent, and it is always trying to emulate the analog world. And I think that the digital world can sound just as good. I feel like a lot of the errors that are made in the digital world are usually speaker deployment, or, you know, the way that they optimize the PA, the way they curve the PA, the way that they just use compression. And yeah, there's some more tricks that you have to keep in mind when you're in the digital realm. You know, like the digital thing is very clean. So then you have to understand the mechanics of what was happening. And that's what is also getting lost in our industry, because records aren't made quite the same. So we're all chasing this unicorn that, you know, we're getting to a point where less and less people know how those great records sounded. You know, like it was like, okay, well, it started with a tape machine, you know, the preamp hitting the tape machine, and tape machine returned it into the desk. Then they printed it to another tape machine. You know what I mean? Like, and these signals are all these little tiny ways of adding these saturation points. And for us, we're just in this clean world, naked and alone. You know,
I wonder if that is a kind of an explanation though of why younger engineers are turning to hardware straight away, because of not having the experience of actually using it before. Like for me, for instance, I didn't grow up working in a studio, and I was a drummer. I wanted to play drums live, and I found my path as a session drummer and become a musical director. And only as I've got older and earned money from playing drums and being an MD that I've started to buy analog gear and hardware gear. It's more like a reverse engineering process of like learning how, oh, that's what a 1073 sounds like and why. Yeah. And thinking back to the conversations I've had with front of house engineers I've met over the years, and they're explaining to me about EQ and the basics of compression, and how gain stage and EQ are the two things in like the two weapons I could have in my arsenal of ways of making the show sound better. I find it fascinating that we're in like a really digital age, and with a digital show like Billie, but there are musicians and musical directors like me and engineers coming through that don't have that experience, like you're saying, of actually working on analog gear. And I don't think there's anything wrong with seeing racks of analog gear at front of house. Actually quite excited to see that. But it's also amazing to hear your perspective the other way around, having come through studios and like incredible studios too, to like, you know how this gear sounds, you know how to get what you are hearing and what you want the show to sound like out of the digital tools in front of you. And that's like mega inspiring hearing it that way around. I
mean, to me, it's like, and I'll say too, and I don't want to, to me, I'm always still learning. Like I'm still trying to figure out, like, I think that it's tough, because I think that right now, I think some of the tools that allowed me to grow the fastest was having my own console. I have my own little like C1500. I have my own console. I have my own Waves rig and servers, and I can try things, you know what I mean? And it takes time. And, you know, these resources aren't always available to me. I'm so grateful that I was, you know, somehow crazy enough to be like, I'm just going to go on a limb and buy this stuff, and hopefully it won't be a problem.
It worked out okay.
I remember, yeah, and it worked out, and it was great. And I feel like being able to sit there and play around with these tools and try to analyze it. I mean, it takes time. In the live world, you have no time, so I can't fault an engineer for that, because we have to do our job. We have to create a record in 30 minutes,
Sure.
in a room that's different from yesterday, with a PA that might be different from yesterday, with a console that might be different from yesterday. And, you're literally like, it's a crazy like that. I mean, live guys are a different cloth, it's just from a different, perspective, and it's tough. So being able to slow things down, right, and work in the virtual world, it's very, very, very important, I think. And, to me, I just find I'm more fascinated with what I can do with consistency, because the Billie show, to me, number one is consistency. I don't want to show up to a gig and be like, oh, my tube tech compressor's tubes just went out. I have to put new tubes in it. It's going to change the sound of all this
That's
stuff.
what techs are for, though, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it doesn't matter. Even I'm not worried about it breaking, but I'm also worried. It's like, okay, well, now it's not going to sound the same. You know what I mean? Like that's, and every single piece of outboard gear, they're going to sound similar, very similar, but they're not always going to sound the same. And, all those old school guys that are carrying that stuff in the rack, they know that. And it's a different kind of situation. For me, I wanted consistency. To me, when you're on the knife's edge of trying to keep a vocal loud in front, in a big show with a really loud audience, in a reverberant space that is pretty much the worst place you could do, all you want is consistency, so you could fight all the elements that are changing. Like the room, the deployment, the reflections, the bounce, the lack of impact. Maybe there's a parking structure under this arena. All these things, change everything. So to me, I'm just like, I want to know that when I pull up my show, it's exactly the same, right? That way I could work with what's changing today, not like a moving target. And do I think it's the absolute right move? No, I think everyone has a different approach. Do I think that's something I'm going to do forever? Probably not. But I also feel like a lot of people, including myself, we don't spend enough time really digging into the tools that we have. We have so many tools. Even in a modern console, I'm still finding things that I've been, I haven't messed with in the desk. You know what I mean? Like things that I just never tried. So it's like,
do you think a lot of that is just the nature of live and not having time to do it? There's never enough time in rehearsals, right? And even when we got pre-production, there's never enough time. Especially as I observe of the Billie show, chasing the extra 1% everywhere, from every source from stage to front of house. The way you're talking about your approach to Billie's mic and the signal path there, that approach to get those extra percent, that's got to come through like hard graft. But how do you, with that pre-production time, with that rehearsal time, how do you get there? Just every day, just trying to find things and fix things show to show. I guess, sound check, like show records and virtual sound check stuff helped that. But like I read this quote from, I think it was from Aaron Forbes, MD, right, on who I think is incredible. And I don't know where I read it. I think it was in an interview somewhere, or somebody was quoting him saying that let's move the needle 1%. Now, I've met Aaron once, maybe. I think I met him at the Manchester Arena show last year. Shook his hand. No, I fist bumped because it was those times. Yeah, those times. I didn't really get a chance to talk to him, but having seen the show, like I said, in 2018 or whenever it was, the first 2019, in a club, and then seeing it in the arena, I was blown away with. It still felt like Billie. It still felt as exciting, but it was so controlled from a mix perspective, in a really considered way. I felt like the details have been poured over. And all credit to yourself and the team. And with Aaron, when I read that quote just the other day, actually, I thought, do you know what? From what I know of him, and especially what I know of Andrew, and his approach to drums, and how seriously, in an amazing way, he takes his job and his sound. Like, I sense that, that must be just that whole let's chase the 1% thing. Because that's the thing that I carry. I'm trying to perpetually work towards is one day I'll be on a show where it's like I feel like I've got every percentage out of it, and it's this amazing experience. And been very fortunate to work on some amazing shows with amazing teams, but that 1% of broadcast comes from ensuring that you've high passed stuff on your stems that shouldn't be there on your backing tracks, and it means everything's in phase with your triggers, and it means you've time aligned stuff, and it means that you've made a decision with your front of house engineer to either send your split directly from stage, or you're sending stems from front of house. I've got so many questions, as you can tell, but I totally love the way your show sounds, and I can see the detail, because it's so difficult with a minimal record like Billie's to make that sound powerful and exciting, especially over a crowd that must be like 110 dB or something.
115 between 110 and 115. Our record was in Festhalle and Frankfurt, 118, and it clipped the mic, so we don't even know how loud it really actually got.
Right. Well, I mean, hats off, man. The show I heard,
I tell you,
the show I heard was clean and loud, and it sounded so good.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. I really do. I felt like I did not enjoy those shows as much as I wanted to with the O2, because I feel like because it was so big and because of the arm, they always stuck us so far back in the arena where, to me, it's like when you're out 180 to 200 feet away from the PA, it's just like at a certain point, you're just like, oh yeah, I feel it. I feel the distance. I feel It's like, I feel the lack of in my faceness, that it's like, it's hard to make decisions when you're so far back there. So you're kind of like, okay, I know what I'm doing, and I know what to ignore, but I also know what to focus on. In a perfect world, I wouldn't be that far back, but because of that arm, we had to occupy all the space at the back, so they didn't, tie off the entire floor.
Yeah.
So, that, but also to circle back to the 1% thing, I think that's a great quote, because not only it's just Aaron's mentality, but it's also, I feel like, it's everyone's mentality. I feel like it's like every single person is trying to do that, like from myself to Andrew Marshall to Phineas doing his thing, to Aaron, to Derek, who helps Aaron in, the situation, to Salim, to Trevor, to Mike Porman, who's an incredible drum tech. Like it's great, because all of those things add up to be a really smooth and you can really isolate things and try to figure out what the problem is instead of chasing your tail. Yeah. The fact that I barely have to mess with drum EQs at all is awesome. It's like I pull it up and there they are.
That's Gretsch drums, right?
Yeah. Gretsch. I'm a huge fan. And that's the toughest part. It's like, I feel like, and I feel like most people are trying to do that, but also when you get to a certain point, you don't want to just like walk away. And I also think that even though you say that you would eventually find that point, maybe there'll be a show in your future where you're like, oh, there's nowhere to improve. That will not happen, because people who ask those questions will always find something. And that's why we're doing what we're doing at this level. Yeah. And it's fun. I mean, that's the fun part, moving the needle, I suppose.
Move the needle. It's stress inducing, did it? I don't know. It keeps me up at night sometimes. I was on the last Bastille, this last campaign, front of house at the O2 with Coop. They're incredible front of house engineer. We'd spent so much time.
He's really good.
He sends his love, by the way. He messages me and say, "No way, he's speaking to Drew." Yeah, he's incredible.
Yeah,
we spent a lot of time together. I remember going to, actually, when he was loading up his console and he was going through a new workflow, I went down. We spent a day together, and we've spent a lot of time back and forth on what I think the show could be, because their last record was fully electronic, even all the drums. A massive departure from Pompeii era Bastille, and it meant rebuilding like the tech for how we run the systems, and it meant, of course, like all Ableton world, probably why they called me and my guys. But with Coop, an amazing sounding gig, and then suddenly I brought in or facilitated all this detail in programming coming from laptops that was being played and not a track. Suddenly there's a whole new world of information input wise is console. And at the O2, because you are so far back, it's like, oh, do we push that couple of dB? Do we not? It's like, no, we've got to trust that we're happy with this show and it's great, and just let it sit. And it's just this room. So even then, we're still like making notes, and I've got set lists for days, reams of set lists with notes back and forth with me and Coop and whoever, just trying to chase that extra 1%. And I think that, personally speaking, if that's not there, if you don't feel that, then I don't know if that's something you should be doing anymore. Is that... I don't know if that's a big statement, but
no, I think it's the truth. I mean, first of all, why would you want to do it?
Yeah, sure.
Like, if you're not doing it for this is the best part. I mean, everyone's seen that meme where it's like, my family thinks I do this, my friends think I do this, my wife feels like this is what I do, what I think I do, and what I really do. And what we're really doing is pushing stuff off a truck and then pulling it off and on a truck. I mean, we're glamorized movers,
Yeah, and sat in catering
too. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just like that's the most important part of it. It's like, that's supposed to be the fun part. That's the point where we could forget about everything and just be present for maybe the first moment of the day. You're just like, well, nothing is going to bother me, and I'm straight laser focused on this one particular thing, which in these days it's kind of hard. Yeah. And also, like, to Coop's credit too, it's like, that's the hard part about, like, when you build a mix and have that mentality of what, like, I feel like the newer workflow is, and not necessarily saying it's like brand new. And I mean, there's a lot of engineers that embrace this. And I feel like my take on mixing, first of all, one of the things that I told Billy was just like, my thing is, I take a lot of stock in the record because people take a lot of time to get that right. That is a blueprint to what the artist wants, right?
Completely agree, yeah.
But then, of course, the live world is going to be different. So you're going to want to, first of all, make it exciting. And second of all, take those live elements and make them work with what's going on, But also, my other side of that would be, my mentality is, what comes off my desk should be a record. Like, it should sound really damn good. If I level matched it to my references that are pop mastered, compressed to, the last inch of its life, it can hold itself true. Because what happens is exactly what happens for us. We don't, like, sometimes Aaron can come to the broadcast truck and come to some of these bigger, Glastonbury and Coachella, but we do a lot of other festivals that are, where he's not there. So to me, at this point, I have 3 different ways of pushing out a mix. I have my groups, which I seldom do unless Aaron's there and Aaron asks for it.
Yeah.
Then I have those groups feed 3 matrices. My matrices go as drums, acoustic drums, music, and lead with effects.
Yeah.
And then that all feeds my main bus, and that's what feeds my PA. But on most of all these festivals, those 3 matrices are what I send out.
Interesting.
And it's and I mean, because it's like, you think about it, it's like, the 1% thing completely circles back around, because even though we have timelessly, like, gone through all those tracks to try to make everything perfect, Aaron and I, one of the things that I was like, him and I were talking about was trying to be able to cut a little bit of a mid-side hole in the middle of some things that are dense in some songs, which help, when that's printed and on the track. But also, like, taking that as, like, I kind of lost my train of thought here, but we were talking about, the difference from the actual show. So we take all that time in rehearsals to get that to work. And then you get into a show and then you're like, okay, I'm actually at the show. And then this is where the game footage for me kicks in. Sure. I listen back and I'm like, okay, so in this position, I'm actually losing this. So these are things that I can automate on my end. So I start automating those little tiny differences, those little 1%. And every single song has its own scene. And eventually, like, you're kind of like, well, I'm now automating a lot of different things, not like crazy, but, these little tiny fine-tuned things, and that is being translated on these stems that I send out. It's hard for a guy that may not even know, he's mixing how many different bands, like he's going to be able to just rough up a mix and just throw it out there. No, because nobody watches that.
This exactly it. This is like the thing that's been like a massive challenge I've been trying to get my head around all my career so far is you spend all the time with a great artist rehearsing it, or not enough time rehearsing, but you have a great show, it sounds great front of house, and then you hear it back on YouTube and it's in the UK, it's Glastonbury, it's Big Weekend, it's Live Lounge, it's all the BBC events where they very seldom take stems or a left-right from front of house, and they're just taking your split, and it sounds like shit. And I remember I think a massive turning point in my career actually was as an MD. I was a drummer, right? But I was like, how do we make sure that
doesn't happen? It
doesn't happen. So it's like, how do we work backwards from that? So if what we hear in our ears on stage, it sounds great and we're playing really well, and it sounds good at the house, then there's something that isn't right between what we're sending and the magic that our engineers doing in front of the house through snapshots, through everything. But particularly in the UK, the BBC has always been, especially like Glastonbury, will take your split and then first 10 seconds of song one, right? It's unity gain, you know, at 0. And I always find it fascinating that when you watch like a Glastonbury live stream, for every gig, like the first 30 seconds, 60 seconds are so crucial in seeing what the gig actually sounds like, because the broadcast engineer usually just gets all of the audio and goes, that 0, we go from there, make sure the vocal is loud. And for me, it's a bit of a tangent, but for me it was like a turning point, like even back with Ellie of, well, if I really understand that our front house engineer is amazing and he's riding levels from track and pulling out like high passing things on track that don't need to be there and affecting the triggered drum pads in different ways, and all this work he's having to do to make that balance right, song by song, and then song by song snapshotting. We're having this like up and down across the mix. So if I can change things that are worth changing at source, like when we went to full like Ableton for all drum triggers, playback, and then all key sounds. Well, if we approach the live, as we're building the song in rehearsals, we approach it like we're building a mix for a record, then let's get all our levels right, our EQs right, and make sure that our things are compressed before they're bounced down for tracks, or they're high passed, or they're low passed, or what we're presenting. Actually, what we're trying to achieve is we take away that need for our front house engineer to song by song doing big 6 or more dB pulls and pushes on crucial elements, or like tracks, right, or like samples or keys parts, because that takes away from the really creative job and is making the vocals sing and throw delays and verbs and all the really creative choices that a front house engineer should be making. And once me and like Simon, main guy that I work with, Simon Francis, great programmer, once we start to unpack that a little bit, I'm like, oh, actually, if we just did this with the drum triggers and then drum pads and then keys, suddenly what we're sending to broadcast effectively is like our gig pretty much flat. And then at front of house, it's never right, it's never perfect, it's never the right balance, because of course PAs, rims, everything, right? But the moves that, like, let's go to Bastille, and like Coop's making 2 dB moves because he's feeling like, oh, this could just be a bit bigger here, or pull it back a little bit. They're like creative decisions, and that translates to them broadcast mixes that suddenly across the artist, and oh, actually we're getting some more consistency of our mixes now. That's a massive tangent, but it was a really fascinating thing for me to, as a musical director, to start to like, oh wow, the front of house position is the most crucial position, and what we send to front of house is massively important in this modern age where everything lives on the internet forever. And when, as a musical director, I'm getting judgments made on my work or my arrangements or whatever because of what's been heard on phones, laptops, right?
Yeah, no, I got that. That's the only way I've gotten mixed critiques on this gig, was via Instagram videos.
Right, but that's how people consume music. So it is an important thing to embrace. But it was a massive game changer for me to go, okay, well, what if we approach this not just playing music and sending music out and having a great engineer just fix it and make it great, which is maybe a traditional front house approach, which requires great skill and patience. But what if we worked with the engineer and we changed the approach from both ends and went, okay, well, mentality-wise at front house, let's not just push and pull everything, let's just sit with it and focus our energies on, let's save, not fight a fire in one department of our mix, of our spectrum across the show. Let's make sure our bottom end is right in the room, that our synth the way we're setting bass from stage, from synth bass, from bass guitar, from a Kemper, from playback, or from subs on an 808 kick, make sure they're all coming down relative groups and not across 20 different random channels. These little things to make it more efficient at a mix at front of house, and then that translating to broadcast. So it's this stuff.
To me, I do think, I was actually thinking about this too, because there's another gig that I've been working on, and they had massive scale up, right? They've been doing smaller clubs before the pandemic, and now they're doing bigger theaters, and we're playing catch up, and I think to myself, I'm like, okay, well, you need to be diligent. The MD position is so vital if you're looking to add tracks, because first of all, the tracks, like you said, they should be set at a static level, right? They should be able to go at 0 and just say, hey, okay, this. You should be able to set them all in relation to, because you're going to have a situation sometimes with these broadcast engineers where they don't know your music, they don't know what's going on. So just setting all that stuff at 0 is so important, so they can work with what the live inputs are. And it's I think, to take it a step further, I think that it's paramount for the front of house engineer to be a part of the process, because it's also like, you're going to have to figure out, okay, well, what is their approach to tuning PAs? What's their approach to tracks? And, everyone has a different approach. And I 100% respect that. To me, I find myself in a situation where I'm searching for the truth. Like, I want to know how things properly sound. I want to know, just down to my inner choice. I want something so boring and so flat, so truthful, so I know exactly what's going on. I want to know the truth. Yeah. And to me, I think in using references when you're building these shows from the ground up is paramount. And referencing as in listening to a track to make sure that your ears don't get tired, to make sure that you don't have these massive spikes, or referencing the artist's record to make sure that people don't go back and do these weird permanent EQ changes in Ableton. There's some playback guys that get a little, gratuitous with some of the things that they do. And then they send these things out and you're like, oh, I got to fix this. And then it's too late. When you're on tour, you're just like, I'm going to set up scenes on the fly, which is an incredibly dangerous thing. And you're just trying to comb your, to dig yourself out a hole that you didn't even know that existed. So it's like, and spending the money to do it right and making sure that you have talent working with that is such an important process. And maybe if it's hiring another front of house guy that's not the guy that goes out on the tour, you just need to know that those inputs are going to sound right. And to me, and it's at this point, I feel so confident, because that is the workflow that I've adopted. I feel like that one workflow is simply put, one mix and it goes everywhere. One mix and it goes everywhere. Now, to me, I was like, yeah, some guys are like, well, you do this. I was like, well, you could say that, but you put up a reference tune and you listen to it, something super compressed, and then you throw up your virtual sound check and, it doesn't sound right. And you have to carve the PA a certain way. Well, what if those references you were using before you even touch a PA? What if you were able to really microscopically go in and try to get this arc, this curve that you have in your mind with whatever reference that you're using to tune the PA, and then you get it to sound that way? Guess what happens? When you send it out in broadcast, it's going to sound that way. You know what I mean? Depending on your situation too. Because, for me, one of my most popular YouTube videos is my left-right processing. None of what I do now, I do not do that anymore, which is sad, because it turned out to be one of my more popular videos. But when I was talking to Paul Hager, who does Miley Cyrus, and we were talking during the pandemic, and that was I was in the most reflective times of trying to break all the habits that I have and how do I get better. And he was telling me, he's just I was just saying, I was like, man, all your broadcasts sound sick. He's like, yeah, I bake it into the groups. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, I don't put anything on my left, right. He's like, well, maybe one thing or something, like a compressor or something, like a glue thing, which is very easily done by any engineer that knows anything about bus compression. But I was just like, and then I had just done this video that Waves promoted. It was I got all this crap doing little tiny things, right? But every little thing added something, you know what I mean? And it wasn't you bypassed it and it was terrible, but it was just like, it was one of those moments where I was like, I got to take a step back. I'm not doing this right the way I should be, and
chasing the 1%.
Yeah. And that's one of the things where I'm like, okay, bad. Let's move it back to the groups, move it back, and then focus on all those things. And if anything, to me, I send out those 3 stems every time. And those 3 stems I consider my master bus. So if anything I want to do on my master bus, I do it on those buses. And the only thing is like just a SSL compressor on my left, right, just very simple, not doing a lot. It's just, that's the workflow.
So cool.
But it's like, that's, we don't really talk about it, but it's unfortunately the way the industry is going. Everyone wants to save money. Everyone wants to make more money. These broadcast gigs are starting to become obsolete because, and this is another thing that I want to share on your podcast for any young engineers who might be watching this. The reason why those shows sounded so bad on those UK festivals is they do the sneaky thing where sometimes they take a split off the drive rack, which means it's going to be post your PA processing. So you're just hacking the crap out of this PA because you didn't get a sound check. You're like playing at 4:00 in the afternoon. It's daytime and you're just trying to make it sound great. And then when you send that to the drive rack, you just literally did everything to make that show sound great live, but you really destroyed it going to broadcast. And they do that a lot. And I highly recommend people being very diligent and be like, I have a mix I can send out front of house. I could set it from stage. You just take a pick, but you're not doing that. You're not sending it out off the drive rack. It's not a representation of the artist, and it's not good for us. It's not good for job security. And it happens all the time. It still happens. I had to fight a couple times on this Australian tour, but like, no, you're not doing that. I'll send it. I could send you from anywhere, but you're going to take a left, right from either me or from monitors. You're not going to send out my EQ to the PA. That's not how this works.
Wow.
So
I found that that's incredible. I found that over the years, it's only really like the TV shows, like US major TVs and some of the UK ones, which is understandable to have an in-house engineer, of course. They're the ones which are really problematic or require some work in trying to get your mix through, either from front of house or from an MD. European festivals, even like Coachella and Lollapalooza, and it's usually a 2-track from front of house is banging and fine. The only other ones that I've consistently come up against are UK, BBC, and then Rock in Rio. I've done it twice, so it's not a huge amount of times, but both times we've gone back and forth on that. You take either our groups or our left, right. That's it, and they've taken the split and then mixed it themselves, and it's just crushing because like Rock in Rio, it's 120,000 people. It's a massive show, and it doesn't sound bad, right? Just I guess the context is trying to chase that 1% of. I know, but it's not our show. It's not what we've created, and it's now lives on the internet, and that kind of bums me out a little bit. But isn't it interesting? Go on, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I was like, one of the nicest compliments I've ever gotten from someone was the first time I met Simon Thomas. I don't know whether you're familiar with him, but
not Simon.
He was mixing Halsey. He's mixed Ariana Grande, a bunch of huge artists. But we were on the same gig at Hollywood Bowl, and I had never met this guy. And they had kicked me around front of house just because I was like the low man on the totem pole, right? Like with Billy at that time in 2019, they were like, oh, you guys are, small potatoes, right? And you guys got a small desk. You could go, and they moved me numerous times. Next thing you know, I'm standing in the sun. They have no easy up. I'm sweating. I'm pissed because I'm like, I've had to move numerous times, and now I got like 15 minutes before my line check, and then we got 15 minutes. That's it. It's a turntable stage. Every
Stress.
star on the planet is on there. And, Simon is gearing up to do his check with Halsey, who is the secret guest that night, who really came out guns a-blazing. But I put up my mix. I get it to sound good. I'm like, all right, cool. And then this guy comes running over. He's like, who are you? He's like, are you doing Billy? I'm like, yes. He's like, you mix like a Brit. And I'm like, all right. I'll take it.
Like a Brit.
I was just like, Yeah. And I was just like, I love it because he's British, and like I guess there was like there's also like the infamous low mids of a lot of the Brit recordings and whatnot, and and I kind of I'm trying to segue into the fact with BBC. It's like I've done a lot of things with them, and they want to have control, and they're not bad at what they do, but they're very specific things, right? They have a very specific thing, and it might not be the thing. Like we did one thing, and I'm trying to remember what it was, but they just had to. I couldn't get those guys to turn down the toms for the life of me. I'm like, listen, I love toms, but this isn't the Beatles. You got to turn that down. Like this, it's not. I mean, they sound
That's
great.
awesome.
I agree, but like you got to turn it down. I'm going to get in trouble. This is my boss, and that was one of those things where that was the one time we were like, okay, well, we're not going to bring in our front of house console or our monitor console, which was very rare. So we were kind of just, Salim and I were just trying to like, talk them through it. And Billie hated it. She hated every moment of it. And then when it came out, it just didn't sound like her. And no matter what we could do, it's just like, you just mix it a certain way. Like to me, it's like the artist is at this point where they're accustomed to it just being a certain way. Like they know that they hired us to do a job and we're going to execute that job. But if we don't have our gear, it's hard to do that. So like, like you said, on these TV shows, you're just kind of in this negotiation standpoint and you're just trying to make the best of it. But sometimes it's hard. BBC, they like to control those kinds of situations. And every time I fight them every time. And every time I say, nope, you're not getting anything. You're not going to get a split. We're not giving a split. And you're just going to take these groups. And that's it. That's how it's going to be.
I mean, I've been in so many broadcast trucks to the BBC over the years, and live lounges particularly, I guess just being based here. And I've got to know the engineers and the head engineers there really, really well over the years. And I love it. I love that the BBC have such a care and pride over this is how we mix music, sound for all our formats. I love that because the history of the BBC and the music from the BBC is hard to argue with, right? I found it challenging, but I think when it was a time of, but I don't know what they're doing and I don't understand how to make that better in that moment, especially at a live lounge where you have no time and it's fully live. And I think for me personally, it's been a massive rewarding learning experience being in the trucks and meeting the guys and asking the questions about, well, next time, how could I get this and this and this? And so many things like learning about from like an MD perspective in the truck, which is terrifying, learning how to be confident and to be concise and to know exactly what you need and why, to make quick decisions in the moment, like just semantics and like being personable is like just like really seem like silly things, but like massively important things to learn.
And also having your priorities, like what's important, what is the most important thing, first vocal, and then what, what's the thing that the artist cares about,
Totally.
Like, I know Billie BV's and low end, she's just doesn't want to have no low end. The whole show is low end, but it's a very particular thing. It's a very low mid, like the records themselves sound very distinct and people tend to try to carve it out. It's like, no, you can't be afraid. You just got
hard to get right in arena though. So hard to get right, and then translate to broadcast even harder.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Hats off to you, my man.
Yeah.
Hats off to you. You're getting it right.
Thank you.
We're about to run out of time again on this call. I could talk to you for hours. I will literally have. Which is again, I'm just going to call you after this just to have a chat. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, for sharing your insight and your wisdom and experience. I'm like lit up and like thinking about, oh yes, no, nothing on the master bus and the console from the house. Groups. Mate, I love it.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being on.